Archive File 001. Classification. Restricted. What follows has been verified by 14 independent sources. What this file contains, I delayed presenting it for 17 cycles. Remain with me. Beneath the excavation grid, something pulsed. The primary acoustic drill had reached a depth of 900 meters on KV 7731. This was a barren satellite orbiting a dying red dwarf in the outer Sagittarius arm. Possessed no atmosphere. Possessed no active tectonic core. It held absolutely zero biological history. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards of the pressurized command tent. Then nothing. Dr. Verith Sonol stared at the primary subsurface scanner. Her 4 gray-blue eyes locked onto the glowing readout. The machine was registering an anomalous calcium deposit embedded directly within the deep bedrock. Biological. The word blinked on the display in sharp, unyielding Varanthi script. Sonol wiped a fine layer of gray static dust from the console screen. The ambient temperature outside the thin polymer walls of the habitat was hostile enough to freeze methane solid. Nothing lived on this rock. Nothing had ever lived on this rock. The geological surveys of this sector were unanimous. Run the diagnostic again, Sonol ordered. Technician Lirith adjusted the spectral resonance frequencies. His hands moved over the control board with practiced precision. The heavy extraction machinery overhead groaned as the automated systems held the drill shaft in perfect suspension. The data returned identical. Depth, 900 meters. Matrix, silicate, anomaly, biological. Sonol leaned closer to the monitor. The subsurface imaging algorithms began to clear the static, resolving the return into a distinct picture. It was a bone, or rather a fossilized fragment of a skeletal structure. It sat perfectly encased in a vein of crystallized silicate. The density readings matched complex calcium phosphate structures. How could a biological matrix survive here? More importantly, how did a bone get trapped inside solid bedrock before the rock itself had even cooled from the moon's initial formation? The scan hit a processing snag. The onboard system paused. It was attempting to match the structural geometry of the partial skeleton against the Galactic Archaeological Authority's master biological database. The processing ring spun on the screen, illuminating Sonol's face in a pale green light. The image on the monitor showed a partial upper body. It was completely alien to any known evolutionary tree in this sector of the galaxy. Sonol held up a hand, signaling her junior technician. She ordered the drill to stop immediately. The sudden silence in the tent felt heavier than the gravity of the moon outside. They had found something impossible. 72 hours earlier, the Galactic Archaeological Authority had commissioned this dig as a routine mineral survey. Dr. Sonol possessed a 42-year career. She had personally cataloged 17 extinct species across the inner colonies. She was a senior paleontologist who dealt in facts in sediment layers, in the slow and predictable decay of isotopes. She did not deal in anomalies. KV 7731 was supposed to be a straightforward assignment. 8 previous surveys had mapped this moon. Every single report concluded the exact same thing. No water, no atmospheric retention, no complex organic molecules. It was a dead rock spinning around a dying star, entirely devoid of the chemical precursors required for life. The Varanthi team had set up their extraction grid in a deep crater near the northern pole. The environment outside was a perpetual twilight of gray dust and long, stretching shadows. Now, staring at the physical extraction chamber, Sonol felt a strange coldness seep into her secondary hearts. The automated retrieval drone had brought the core sample to the surface. It rested inside the pressurized decontamination lock. The thick block of crystallized silicate dominated the small room. The crystal encasing the skeleton had grown around it over billions of years, creating natural facets that caught the harsh white drill lights like a cathedral window. Someone was buried here, and the moon itself had built them a coffin of light. Lirith stood on the opposite side of the observation glass. His chromatophores shifted to a pale, anxious violet. Varanthi biology reacted poorly to the unknown. Their species thrived on order, on categorization, on finding a neat box for every variable in the universe. The matrix is completely stable, Lirith reported. Sonol activated the microlasers. She began the delicate process of peeling away the outer layers of the silicate block. The scrape of the energy beam against the ancient stone sent a high-pitched vibration through the hull of the lab. Dust suspended itself in the low artificial gravity, catching the light like tiny, frozen stars. This was not a mineral deposit. As the top layer of crystal fell away, the shape beneath became undeniable. It was a ribcage. The proportions were wrong for any Varanthi ancestor. They were wrong for the reptilian species of the Perseus arm. The bones were thick, dense, and built for a gravity well much stronger than the one they currently occupied. Sonol felt the weight of her entire career pressing down on her shoulders. She had built her life on the established timeline of galactic biology. "Prepare the isotope mapping suite," she instructed quietly. "I want an exact age on this material." Lirith hesitated. "Doctor, the surrounding rock is primordial." "I am aware of what the rock is," Sonol replied. "I want to know what the bone is." The isotope mapping sequence took 4 grueling hours. Sonol remained in the lab the entire time. She watched the automated systems slice microscopic slivers from the exposed fossil. The lab AI Meridian processed the samples through the carbon dating and molecular resonance arrays, which meant the waiting was the hardest part. The silence of the room was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the processors. Sonol reviewed the optical scans again. The skeletal fragment consisted of a partial spinal column, a crushed ribcage, and one fully articulated upper appendage. A low chime sounded from the main console. Meridian had finished the first pass. Sonol walked to the screen. She pulled up the readout. Her compound eyes dilated. The inner lids snapped shut for a fraction of a second. 4.6 billion years. She stared at the number. The digits glowed against the dark background of the display. It was a mathematical absurdity. The oldest confirmed multicellular life in the Galactic Archaeological Authority's database was precisely 1.4 billion years old. That was the absolute ceiling. Before that, the galaxy was a chaotic swirl of cooling rock, intense radiation, and toxic gases. This skeleton predated every known species by over 3 billion years. "Meridian," Sonol said. Her voice caught in her throat. She cleared it. "Recalibrate the resonance array. Run the sequence again. Use the uranium lead decay model this time." "Acknowledged." The AI replied in a smooth, synthesized tone. Sonol paced the length of the small laboratory. She was a scientist. She knew that equipment failed. Sensors drifted out of alignment. Background radiation from the dying red dwarf outside could have skewed the isotopes. There had to be a rational explanation. 2 hours later, the second chime sounded. Sonol did not walk to the console immediately. She stood perfectly still. She let the artificial air of the habitat cycle through her gill slits. She approached the screen. 4.61 billion years. The uranium lead model confirmed the initial reading. The bone was as old as the solar system it was found in. It was older than the oceans of the Varanthi homeworld. It was older than the concept of life itself. Sonol looked through the observation glass at the fossil. The heavy, dense bones rested silently in their crystal tomb. She ordered Meridian to rotate the optical scan of the articulated appendage. The image turned on the screen, rendering the structure in 3 dimensions. The limb ended in a complex joint structure, leading to a cluster of smaller, delicate bones. The skeleton had 5-fingered hands. Impossible. No known ancient species possessed 5 digits. The Varanthi had 3. The Centaurian quadrupeds had hooves. The avian species of the inner rim had talons. 5 distinct, articulated digits implied a highly specific evolutionary path. It implied a creature built to manipulate its environment with extreme precision. A creature built to hold tools. Lirith entered the lab. He carried a fresh data slate. His skin was completely pale now, stripped of all color. "Doctor," he began. "Look at the hands," Sonol interrupted softly. Lirith looked at the screen. He did not speak for a long time. The scrape of a tool against 4 billion-year-old stone had revealed a ghost that should not exist. Run a full morphological analysis, Sonol instructed. Meridian's processing core word into a higher gear. The AI began mapping the geometry of every surviving bone fragment. It cross-referenced the angles, the joint stress markers, and the cranial attachment points against every cataloged lifeform in the known universe. The results began cascading down the secondary monitor. Bipedal, bilateral symmetry, endoskeletal, calcium-based. Every new data point was a hammer blow to the foundation of Varanthi science. The creature walked on 2 legs. It stood upright. The spinal column entered the skull at the base, not the rear. This meant it looked forward, standing tall, fighting gravity with a perfectly balanced internal structure. Lirith watched the numbers scroll. It doesn't match the database. The system is rejecting the parameters. Force the parameters, Sonol commanded. Tell Meridian to search outside the ancient categories. Search the modern registry. Lirith tapped the console. The AI expanded its search parameters. It bypassed the fossil records. It bypassed the extinct species index. It began scanning the modern, living, spacefaring species currently registered with the Galactic Council. I have verified this data 17 times. I was hoping to find an error. The AI stopped. A single match appeared on the screen. It was a minor entry. It was filed under a young, relatively unimpressive civilization located in a distant, unremarkable spiral arm. Sonol stared at the profile. The match was not perfect. The fossil was degraded. But the structural geometry, the density of the femur, the curvature of the ribs, and the unmistakable arrangement of the 5-fingered hand all aligned perfectly with the anatomical diagrams on the screen. "Doctor," Lirith whispered. Sonol did not answer. She was opening a secure channel to the Galactic Archaeological Authority's restricted archives. The morphology resembled the anomalies logged in a previously sealed geological report from the Orion Arm. Sonol had heard rumors of that file years ago. A corporate mining fleet had found anomalous calcium structures deep inside an asteroid. The official report claimed it was a crystalline malfunction in the scanning equipment. The team had been quietly reassigned. The site had been heavily bombarded to prevent navigational hazards. Sonol typed her override credentials into the terminal. She pulled the raw data from that old Orion report. She overlaid the Orion acoustic scans with the fossil currently sitting on KV-7731. They matched. The exact same bone density. The exact same bipedal structure. The exact same 5 fingers. The silence in the room became suffocating. 2 completely different locations. 2 entirely different star systems. One was a dead moon. The other was a rogue asteroid. Both contained the exact same impossible biological signature. And both signatures belonged to a species that supposedly just achieved faster-than-light travel a few centuries ago. "Lirith," Sonol said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. "Seal the lab. Disconnect the primary comms array from the planetary network. We are completely dark as of this exact moment." Lirith swallowed hard. "Doctor? What is happening?" Sonol looked back at the fossil inside the decontamination lock. The dust of 4 billion years clung to the delicate joints of the hand. "We are going to sequence the deep core DNA," she said. Lirith stepped back. "That matrix is too old. The proteins will have degraded to ash. You can't pull a genetic sequence from rock." "The silicate crystal acted as a stasis field," Sonol replied. Her 4 eyes remained fixed on the pale bones. "The marrow cavity is perfectly preserved. There is genetic material in there. I know it." She walked over to the heavy physical extraction tools. The pattern was forming in her mind. It was a terrifying, jagged shape that threatened to tear her reality apart. She just needed the final piece of the puzzle. She needed the genetic code. She needed to look into the blueprint of the universe and see whose name was written on it. Meridian subroutines carved through the restricted network. Sonol had authorized a deep archive retrieval. She bypassed the standard academic firewalls. She routed the inquiry through the encrypted channels reserved for senior authority directors. The moon KV-7731 rotated slowly outside, casting long, knife-like shadows across the exterior of the excavation tent. Inside, the only light came from the cascading data streams. Sonol cross-referenced the precise dimensional geometry of the femur with every anomaly report filed in the last century. Most paleontologists ignored anomalies. They dismissed them as instrument calibration errors or naturally occurring mineral simulacra. Sonol was no longer dismissing anything. The search algorithm expanded beyond the local sector. Query: calcium phosphate matrix. Parameter: unrecognized bipedal morphology. Depth: greater than 500 meters. 3 distinct files illuminated the main console. The first was a sealed geological survey from a volatile moon in the Perseus Arm. The second originated from a corporate drilling operation on a rogue planetoid drifting through the Orion Arm. The third was a highly redacted military engineering report from a dead rock in the Centaurus Arm. All 3 reports detailed the discovery of impossible calcium deposits. All 3 teams had noted the bipedal structure. All 3 excavations had been abruptly cancelled, their findings buried under bureaucratic classifications of instrument malfunction and sensory degradation. Sonol's secondary hearts beat in a heavy, asynchronous rhythm. Her chromatophores shifted to a bruised, dark indigo. The same skeletal structure appeared on 4 moons across 3 spiral arms, spanning 40,000 light-years. She watched the data streams cascade down the primary monitor in endless vertical lines of cold green light as the processing algorithms desperately tried to find a mathematical correlation between a rocky satellite that had never possessed an atmosphere and a biological entity that breathed oxygen. There was no correlation. There was only the terrifying reality of the pattern. Someone had seeded these bones. Someone had buried them deep within the bedrock of nascent celestial bodies before those bodies had even stabilized. Lyrith stood near the containment lock. He did not speak. The junior technician understood the gravity of the glowing files on the screen. The Varanthi Archaeological Authority had lied. The Galactic Council had lied. The entire foundation of their historical timeline was a carefully curated fiction designed to hide a truth too massive to confront. "Doctor," Lyrith finally whispered, "the chemical extraction is ready." The silence in the room stretched out, cold and absolute. Sonol turned toward the isolation chamber. The physical extraction of the genetic material required absolute precision. The 4.6 billion-year-old silicate had effectively acted as a perfect, natural stasis field, arresting the entropic decay of complex organic molecules. By applying a localized hyperresonance frequency, Lyrith managed to fracture the microscopic crystal bonds without generating thermal friction. He extracted a core sample no larger than a grain of dust from the deepest marrow cavity of the femur. The sample was then subjected to a molecular reconstruction wash, coaxing the dormant, fragmented proteins into a readable sequence. The sequencer initialized. The low hum of the processing core vibrated through the floor plates. Sonol gripped the edge of the console. The base pairs began to align on the secondary monitor. It was a slow, agonizing process. The alien DNA was heavily degraded, fragmented by the sheer weight of eons, but the stasis field had preserved just enough of the structural lattice for Meridian to rebuild the sequence, which meant the tectonic models were entirely fabricated. If biological life existed during the accretion phase of this solar system, the fundamental laws of planetary formation had to be rewritten. Sonol watched the green markers snap into place. Adenine, cytosine, guanine, thymine. The building blocks were standard. The arrangement was not. The genetic code was a dense, incredibly complex map of evolutionary adaptations. A low chime. The sequence was complete. Meridian did not pause to process the implications. The AI immediately ran the rebuilt genetic sequence against the active registry of all known living species in the galaxy. 99.94%. Homo sapiens. Earth. The youngest species in the registry is older than the registry itself. Sonol braced her upper arms against the cool metal of the workstation. 42 years. She had spent over 4 decades meticulously mapping the evolutionary branches of the inner colonies. She had published 12 definitive textbooks on the origins of carbon-based life. She had taught thousands of students that biological complexity required a specific linear timeline of stellar cooling, atmospheric formation, and primordial chemical synthesis. All of it was wrong. Every citation, every peer-reviewed paper, the entire foundation of Varanthi biological science was nothing more than an illusion built over the buried remains of a truth too vast to comprehend. Her career was over. Her life's work was entirely void. The prestige she had earned, the respect of her peers, the undeniable certainty of the fossil record, it all dissolved into the dust of KV 7731. Dr. Sonol, Meridian's synthesized voice broke the heavy silence. The genetic match is confirmed. Shall I log the discovery in the Central Authority database? No, Sonol commanded. Her voice was raspy. Isolate the network. Encrypt the findings. Above the dying red dwarf, the communication relay aligned itself with the Galactic Archaeological Authority's central hub. She did not contact her department head. She bypassed the regional directors entirely. She routed her discovery directly to the diplomatic liaison office assigned to the Sol system. If the evidence was correct, this was not an archaeological matter. This was an existential crisis. If a fully evolved human skeleton existed 4.6 billion years ago, their technological window did not begin after the ice ages of their current homeworld. It extended back to a time before the formation of most current star systems. They had walked across the galaxy while the modern universe was still a cloud of superheated gas. They possessed the engineering capability to bury their dead inside the forming crusts of distant moons. The transmission sent. How long had this evidence been waiting in the dark? The response from Earth took exactly 14 minutes to arrive. It was not a scientific inquiry. It was not a demand for data verification. There were no panicked questions about carbon dating protocols or containment procedures. The text appeared on Sonol's primary monitor in crisp, unfeeling diplomatic font. We have received your report. The results are noted. We have no comment at this time. 3 sentences. Calm. Unbothered. Lirith read the text over Sonol's shoulder. His chromatophores flushed completely white. His gill slits flared in profound distress. They aren't surprised. Doctor, why aren't they surprised? Sonol closed the communication channel. She had no answer. The terrible realization settled over her like a physical weight. The humans were not a young species taking their first steps into a wider galaxy. They were the architects of the graveyard. They were the ancient, silent gods who had walked the stars, built impossible things, and then chosen to forget. And somewhere, deep within their diplomatic offices, someone already knew. The hum of the environmental scrubbers filled the empty space of the tent. Beyond the thin polymer walls, the surface of KV 7731 remained frozen and indifferent. Sonol sat alone in the observation bay. The bone fragment rested under thick containment glass. It was still coated in a microscopic layer of primordial dust. The drill lights refracted through the shattered edges of the silicate crystal, casting fractured rainbows across the metal table. Her 4 eyes kept returning to the appendage. She had catalogued thousands of extinct anatomical structures. She had seen claws designed to tear through reinforced armor plating. She had studied mandibles built to crush solid carbon. She had mapped the wingspans of apex predators that dominated the skies of dead worlds. She understood biology as a weapon, as a mechanism for survival in a hostile universe. This was different. The fossilized hand remained perfectly still under the glass. Its 5 fingers curled slightly inward, as if reaching for something it had lost billions of years ago. The soft, ambient light reflected off Dr. Sonol's dark eyes, mirroring the quiet devastation of a universe that had just remembered its own forgotten origin. It was a hand built to hold tools gently, to create, to build, to shape the foundation of reality itself before retreating into the shadows of their own erased history. Archive File 001 is now sealed. The questions it raises are not. If they were here before the stars formed, who buried them? Or did they bury themselves? Lens used. 1. Dominant tone. Archaeological wonder. Secondary tone. Atmospheric. Formula. F1. The dig. Structure type. Type in, snapback style. C, phase weight zone. Zone M, main build equals 60%. Pacing type, pace slow. Ending type, I, discover archetype. Arch P, thematic conclusion. Theme E, CTA. Blend W, what this file contains. I delayed presenting it for 17 cycles. Remain with me.